Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel, and today we are comparing esports franchise leagues. In the esports industry, we have had a handful of attempts at having a full franchise league, and we're going to be looking at each of them, or at least a couple of them are the main ones that have been happening over the last 5-10 years. And we're going to be looking at which ones have been run well, which ones haven't been run well at all, which ones are the most profitable, the most successful, and talking about the Overwatch League, which is now defunct, and talking about why it failed. Now on your screen here, you can see 3 franchise leagues. There's the Overwatch League, the Call of Duty League, and the Valorant Champions Tour, but don't worry, those aren't the only ones that we're talking about. These are just the first handful that we're talking about. There's 2 more on the next slide that will be shown later. If you're wondering where the League of Legends part of it, that is on the next slide, so don't you worry, all you LoL fans. We will be getting to how that league is structured, or the many leagues that are a part of the LoL esports ecosystem. But first off, we will be getting to the now defunct Overwatch League, as mentioned before. So the Overwatch League, it failed for a lot of different reasons. I talked about it in my video that I uploaded on Friday. From top to bottom, the Overwatch League had problems in nearly every department, from how the game was run, from the deals Activision Blizzard made in terms of the streaming rights. Pretty much everything about the Overwatch League was flawed, and that is part of the reason why it did not, and that's the entire reason why it did not succeed. But one of the main reasons that it didn't succeed was because its format, as we're going to look at now, was bad. It was just extremely flawed format, and I think this is a really good example of how you shouldn't run a franchise league, so let's go through it. So the Overwatch League, or the OWL, ran from 2018 to 2023. Now, if you don't know what a franchise league is essentially a league organized by whoever, mainly the developers in the esports case. Companies, investors, they will all pitch in money, or at least have some sort of financial incentive, and get a slot in these leagues and, franchise it. There were 19 geolocated teams within the Overwatch League, and if you don't know what that means teams that are based in cities, so like the Vancouver Titans, the Los Angeles Gladiators, the New York Excelsior. No, Excelsior is a team, it might not be the New York one. I don't know. I wasn't a huge fan of it. I just kind of vaguely paid attention when it was relevant. But essentially, teams will be bought by companies, usually companies that already have, regular sports teams, and they will put a team in a city, and then they will compete within a division. And for the Overwatch League, there were 2 divisions. There was the West, which had 13 teams, and the East, which had 6 teams. So this, I think, is the first example of a problem when we talk about the format of this league. You have 19 teams. They're all based in cities. Now, the teams split by region. North America had 13. EMEA had 1 in the London Spitfire. And Asia, they had 5. And I think most of them were in China. And how these 2 divisions were split up in terms of the amount of teams and which teams were in each division is a very big example of why this league just didn't work. So in the West, you have 12 North American teams, so pretty much all the North American teams except for 1, which was the Dallas Fuel, as well as the 1 EMEA team, which was the London Spitfire. And then the East had 1 North American team, which was the Dallas Fuel, as I just mentioned, and then the rest were 5 Asia teams, again, mainly in Chinese cities. So this is a huge problem, because first off, you have 2 divisions that are completely not the same when it comes to the amount of teams that are in, so the level of competition you're going to be facing is going to be a lot different. And the East does have a open qualifier stage for challengers teams to be able to compete in that region, but that's mainly just because there's not enough teams. It's not for a necessity to help out Tier 2 teams get to the big leagues. It's so that this competition can actually just be fair, because there's just way too many teams in the West, and then there's not enough teams in the East, so you have to match that somehow, so you got to have these extra stages. So the East had an extra layer of competition, so that's a big problem. And for the Dallas Field, the 1 North American team in that region, your travel schedule now is just insane, and your games are going to be mainly played in Asia, so far away from your continent. So the travel schedule is going to be insanely bad. Granted, they did win a Overwatch League championship, I believe it was like 2 years ago. I'm not sure if they were in the East at that point, but this division of teams is just not, it didn't work, and travel schedule was already a problem, especially for teams that were, the only ones in the region, or at least the only ones in the region in a division, because the London Spitfire as well, they were all the way in London in the UK, and they had no other European teams to fight against. And Overwatch, during its years, it mainly just had popularity in the Asia regions. That's why there was, 5 Asian teams. So in terms of how the season format went, the first half, you had 5 regular season games, and then you had a knockout stage, which went into the Mid-Season Madness, which is the mid-season tournament that combines teams from both regions, or both divisions, I should say. Then the second half is very similar, 5 regular season games, and then there is the play-in stage, which gets you into the Overwatch League playoffs, and then that's how the year ends, which with whoever wins those playoffs. And there isn't any relegation, and that's not surprising at all, because teams had to pay upwards, I think, of like maybe 20 million when the league was first announced. I'm not sure the exact number, but it was a lot of money for these orgs to buy their way into this new exciting league, which was emulating what regular sports leagues had done, and it made investors be like, ooh, okay, now we're getting in some real business now, because esports has been this industry that has been seen to have a lot of potential but hasn't realized that potential fully. And part of the reason is just because it's just not, you don't play video games the same way that you play sports. You don't always need to be physically there. You don't always need to watch on like a cable network or something. You can watch on Twitch for free. You can watch on YouTube Gaming for free. People going to sports events isn't necessarily going to translate to people wanting to go to live esports events. So when you have these regular season games that are played in stadiums that now you have to sell out and try to turn a profit in, and just for like a game between, like the Vancouver Titans versus the Toronto Defiant, like it that's not really going to have a lot of pull yet. It could if the game was grown properly, but it wasn't. And the streaming rights were exclusive to YouTube Gaming, so that pretty much cut their viewership entirely in half. And we'll talk about viewership a little bit later. I have the numbers for the peak viewership for each esport on the next slide. But basically, the YouTube Gaming deal was a really bad idea because they don't want to watch esports on YouTube, and they especially didn't want to watch Overwatch on YouTube. YouTube is now getting better at the live stream side of things, but it still does not have the same pull as Twitch does when it comes to esports and just live streaming in general. So that's the Overwatch League. That's how the season worked. There's maybe too many teams. I think 19 teams. It just didn't work. They were too spread apart. There were teams that had insane travel schedules, which handicaps your competitive ability and your money as well. There were projections that just weren't there. I respected their attempt at scale, at having this high scale franchise league in esports, but it just wasn't ready. The game wasn't ready. The world wasn't ready. The industry wasn't ready for it as well. Could something like this work in the future? I absolutely think it can. It depends on the game. It depends if it stays popular enough. But I think Overwatch maybe pulled the trigger a bit too early, and maybe we could have had a smaller scale franchise league for Overwatch. And maybe if the game was, patched properly and balanced properly, people wouldn't have lost interest so quickly. It was just a huge mess, and the Overwatch League just ended up really being probably one of the biggest failures in esports ever, and it probably will continue to be that. But moving on to the next franchise league, which is also by Activision Blizzard, we have the Call of Duty League, which was formed in 2020 and is still running today. Now, the Call of Duty League, I actually think, looking at their format and doing the research that I did on them, this might be the best format for a franchise league that we've seen so far. Now, people will look at League of Legends and how that works. I'll get to League of Legends in a bit, but in terms of where Call of Duty is as an esport, I think that this league works really well, actually. Is it massively successful? No, but it does have a pretty solid format that I think it should be something that we should look at improving upon, but also this could be a good example of how esports does things in the future if we want to go the route of having geolocated teams, because in the Call of Duty League there are 12 geolocated teams by region. There's 10 North American teams and 2 EMEA teams, so 2 in Europe. I believe one's London and Paris is the other one. Now, those 2 teams will have bad travel schedules because they will have to play regular season games in North America for the most part. So that is that's the same problem that we had in the Overwatch League, but at the same time, it is to a smaller extent. So how the season works for the Call of Duty League is we have a 7-game qualifier into a major tournament. We have 4 tournaments a year. So 4 majors that are based in a city of one of the teams. So a team will host a major tournament. That'd be very interesting. I don't know all the results that have happened through all of the Call of Duty League tournaments, but that is interesting to have like a team be hosting one of these tournaments. And like what if they're a really bad team that year? Then they're not going to compete in that tournament, or at least not go very far. So that's an interesting kind of like tidbit to it, but I do think that format, that's a good idea. I think it's a great idea because you have it move around. You have these big events. You can get teams to advertise their tournament in their city, and I think that potentially could be a good way to bring casuals into the scene. So the Call of Duty League does have some tournaments that do include tier 2 teams. It doesn't seem like it's a yearly thing that happens all the time. I was in one of the format explainer videos that I watched for a previous season, but I didn't see it for the upcoming year or for last year. But the Challengers League teams, which is the name of the tier 2 teams, those will get chances to, move up at least for a tournament or two and showcase their skills. It's not the best tier 2 system, but tier 2 systems are kind of tricky for how you have it tie into the tier 1 scene. Also for the Call of Duty League, there is no relegation, and it is, as well as the Overwatch League, it is a YouTube gaming exclusive, which again, I do not think is a good idea at all. You're handicapping your viewership by doing that. So what I see from this Call of Duty League, I see it's a similar format to the Overwatch League, but it's a smaller scale. You don't have too many teams. You're not looking to expand just a lot to every major city in North America because it just isn't ready for that. Are they particularly selling tickets well to regular season games? Probably not. I haven't looked at the numbers for that. I don't know if they're public or not, but the format is simple. You can follow the league easily. There's not too many teams to follow, so that means there's not too many players to follow either. And I think, at least as a start, this is a good format. I absolutely do think that. So Call of Duty might not be the most popular esport. I personally don't watch Call of Duty esports, but I think looking at this format, I think this is a good way to do it. Now we move on to one of the more recent additions to esports franchising, and that is the Valorant Champions Tour, which technically has been running since, I believe, 2021, but the franchise league part of it has only been running since 2023. Now, the VCT is technically a franchise league, but Riot sees it as a partnered league, where they partner with orgs that get their spots in the league, and there are financial incentives and deliverables that these orgs have to give Riot, and Riot has to give them. So it's not we spend a lot of money to get a spot, and then we potentially lose all that money if we're either a bad team or this league goes haywire. It's a partnership league where Riot will actually give that team money through certain incentives and certain in-game cosmetics and whatnot. And I think that that's a very good idea for a brand new partnered league right now, because esports as an industry is not doing very well. We're not seeing a lot of money coming in. The crypto money that was very, very plentiful during 2020, 2021, that's just gone now. That just doesn't exist anymore. And that really handicapped a lot of teams, TSM. And whereas the LCS and the other League of Legends leagues had a buy-in system where teams had to pay upwards of $10 million to get a slot, same for the Overwatch League, same for the Call of Duty League. Recent LCS teams have been bought for like $10 million plus when they changed teams. I believe the Shopify Rebellion acquiring of the TSM slot, that was $10 million. But anyways, I do think it's a good idea to not have a buy-in for a brand new league at this stage, because esports needs to have companies find more ways to make money instead of more ways to spend money. But now looking at it, the Valorant Champions Tour has 43 teams. That's if China has 10. So China is the brand new region that now will be a part of the VCT going forward. They will have their own franchise league. We don't know the amount of teams. We don't know which teams are going to be a part of that yet. We will see probably within the next month or two. But it is 10 partnered teams per league, and then there will be the challenger teams that come up through the ascension process that we're now seeing. So that makes each region have 11, aside from China, again, if they have 10. And those challenger teams will be allowed to stay in that league for, I believe it's 2 years. We'll see if that ends up changing. I know Ludwig wants that to change. He's hoping that his team kicks a lot of ass and is able to convince Riot to rescind that decision. But basically, you have the 10 partnered teams. You'll have one tier 2 team that was brought up through Ascension, and I guess maybe there'll be 2 at a time when next year happens, because there'll be another Ascension team. So it might end up being like 12 teams per league at some point, but for now we have 43. So in terms of the regional leagues, we have the Americas, which is North and South America and Latin America as well. Then EMEA, which is Europe, and also does include some teams from the CIS region, because you can't really have CIS region teams right now because of the whole Russia-Ukraine conflict. The geopolitical issues of that area are kind of what's stopping that from being seen as like a region in esports right now. But we have the Pacific, which is mainly comprised of Asian teams. So I believe Japan, Korea, Singapore, that region of the world, that's the Pacific League. And then, of course, we have China, which is separate, which is, again, mainly due to geopolitical reasons, and also China's a huge country with a huge population. They will now be the new part of the VCT. So how the format works, we have a regional kickoff tournament, so each region will have their own tournament to kick off the season. That's how the upcoming year is working. And the top teams of each of those tournaments will move on to the first Masters of the year, which is the first international tournament. Then a 10-game regular season stage will kick off, and then that will go into the second Masters of the year. And then after that, a second regular season stage, which will go into Champions. Now, the VCT format for 2023 worked a bit different from this. There was a kickoff tournament, but that wasn't regional. That was the VCT lock-in tournament. That was every team from the league, so all 30 teams at that time, plus a couple Chinese teams, so it was like 32 teams total. They all competed, and then there was one regular season stage, and then one Masters, and then there was a LCQ, then Champions. So now, a lot of people didn't like that format, and I understood why. I thought having that VCT lock-in tournament, I thought it was a good idea. You know, it's the brand new partnered franchise league. You want to start off with a bang, and that was a great tournament. I thought that was a great time. But at the same time, it did make the rest of the year's format kind of sloppy. But now we have this, which I think makes a lot of sense. I think having 2 regular season stages, I think that's great. I loved the regular season stage. It was really fun seeing which teams were doing well, which teams were off to bad starts and good finishes, good starts, bad finishes, and seeing how the teams evolved throughout the season, how the strategies evolved, how the meta evolved. And now having 2 regular season stages, I think that's awesome. I love that. And we're back to having 2 Masters per year and a Champions. Love that as well. Having 3 major tournaments, I think that's perfect. And the kickoff tournaments now being regional, I think that's good too, because then you can have that kind of start off with the bang, but in a way that is, you know, just regional, and then you can see these rivalries start to form for the year. There is no relegation in the VCT at this point. A lot of people don't like that there isn't relegation. I understand why there isn't. In a perfect world, do we have it, and do we have it work well? Yes, but at the same time, I understand that they want these teams to, you know, be partners of Riot. So if you're going to go to these orgs and be like, hey, we want to partner with you, we want to, you know, give you these incentives and give you these like financial reasons to be a part of our league. Oh, but also if you suck, you're like out. In terms of competitive fairness, it's not the fairest in the world, but as a business standpoint, I completely understand that. And with the tier 2 teams not being allowed to stay for more than 2 seasons, I think that is something that absolutely should change. I don't understand why you would have these teams come in and then you just like delete them eventually. I guess maybe they just don't want their leagues to become too bloated, but I do think that if you're going to have a time limit, you should at least have some kind of way for those teams to break through that, to be able to just be really competitively dominant, and if they are, then they get to stay. So we'll see if that changes. This is still a very young league. Valorant's still a very young game. And with that, we now move on to our second slide. So this is our second slide. So we have the League of Legends esport format to the right of me now. This is huge. This is a lot. I'll get to that in a second, but I also want to mention the league below it, which is the ESL Counter-Strike Pro League. Now, Counter-Strike does not have a franchise league. The ESL Pro League is the closest thing we have to it, so I figured I would at least talk about it. And even though it doesn't work in the same way and it's not a franchise league, there is a partnership part of it where teams will be partnered and then will be other teams that qualify. but we're going to talk about League of Legends first because there's a lot to talk about with League of Legends. But anyways, the League of Legends League. So in terms of the franchising, it is from 2013 to present. I believe that was the first year of the LCS, or at least the LCS Franchise League. So League of Legends is huge, and I really started to realize how huge League of Legends is when I looked at the format for these leagues and for just this whole thing for the League of Legends World Championship. There are 9 regional leagues in League of Legends. This makes it the biggest franchise league in esports to date. We have the LCS, which is North America, the LCE, EMEA, LPL, China, LCK, Korea, LLA, Latin America, and I guess South America, CB LOL, Brazil, the PCS, which is Pacific, the VCS, which is Vietnam, so I guess that's not a part of the Pacific, and then the LJL, which is Japan, which is, I guess, also not a part of the Pacific. Some of these regions are just country-specific, which I understand because, the league is huge, and there are a lot of players on League of Legends. They have just a huge fan base, especially in Asia. North America is not really known for having good League of Legends teams. Usually we really suck. So because of that popularity, we see this amount of regional leagues that are just country specific. So looking at the amount of teams by region, this is insane. So LCS, we have 10. LEC, 11. LPL, which is China, 17 teams. 17. The LCK, we have 10. The PCS, we have 12. The VCS, we have 8. The CB LOL has 10. LJL has 8. The LLA has 8. The total amount of teams for the League of Legends World Championship for all these franchise leagues, the total amount is 94. 94 teams. That is an insane amount of people. That is an insane amount of teams. As just an insane amount of money being thrown at Riot, because again, this is a buy-in league. The Shopify Rebellion purchase of the TSN team was $10 million. Now, let's do some quick math here. Now, let's say that every team is worth $10 million. Now, that's probably not exactly the number for all the teams, but let's just go off of that general valuation. So that means that Riot, just from the teams purchasing the slots and buying the slots, that is $940 million. This is a huge league. Like, in terms of the money that it takes to run it, it is well over $1 billion, and it is insane. And again, 10 million was just one team that was sold during a part of esports, or a time in esports where we're not really exactly doing very well. So that's generous. that's probably low. So Riot is making money hand over fist. They're easily making over $1 billion with this league. Are the teams making that much? Definitely not. Now, there are definitely people that have done looks into the LCS economics and just the economics of every league. And yeah, the money, I don't think the teams are making nearly as much as what they're paying for, player salaries, for facilities, for coaches, for these slots in general. There's a lot of money being thrown at it, not a lot being returned, or at least not as much as they're giving. And in terms of its format, so we have regional regular season splits, and then there's the MSI tournament, which is the mid-season tournament, which features 13 teams. And then we have a second split, and then we have Worlds, which, at least this year, has 22 teams. So what you can see from this, and I think this is a huge problem, you have 94 teams total. You have 13 teams in the mid-season tournament. You have 22 teams in the Worlds tournament. So there are not a lot of winners in this esports. There are a lot of losers. That is just an insane difference of the amount of teams. So should they let in more teams to these tournaments? I don't know if that's the answer. MSI, Worlds generally has 20 plus teams. That is still a lot of teams for a tournament. So I'm not saying that's exactly what we should do. It's just when you have these teams paying 10 plus million and most of them aren't going to make it to even the mid-season tournament, is it really worth the amount of cash that you're putting in? So there is no relegation, which I understand these teams are paying a lot of money to just have these slots. There is a system in place now for challenger teams to get promoted. There was this whole controversy early in 2023 where teams used to require, they used to need to have a challenger team to basically kind of have like a tier 2 system as kind of like a minor league system, basically, and to keep the tier 2 scene healthy. Now, they took away that requirement this year. That pissed off the Players Association, and because a lot of orgs just dropped those tier 2 teams, and then a lot of players were hung out to dry. So I understand why the players were not happy about it, but from a business perspective, it makes sense. Like, are you really going to force like Cloud9 to have a tier 2 League of Legends team? I don't think that's really necessary, but unfortunately it did screw over a lot of players. There was a solution. I don't exactly know what it was, but basically there is a system for tier 2 teams to at least compete in the LCS and all the other leagues. So that's League of Legends. It's huge. It's probably a bit too bloated. There's a lot of teams going around. There's a lot of money going around. Is the money coming back? At least not as much as you would hope. Is the money coming in? Yeah, it seems like it is. In terms of the health of League of Legends, it's still popular. It's still making a lot of money. There's still a lot of prize money there. So at least this system has worked. Can it collapse? I absolutely can see it collapsing, but I do have confidence in Riot to figure out a way to get out of any hole that they may put themselves in. So that's it for the main franchise leagues, but I do want to talk about the ESL Counter-Strike Pro League, which has been going from 2015 to now, and it's on its 19th season currently. So again, this is not a regular franchise league, but this is a partnered league where there are 15 partner teams, and then there are 7-team qualifier teams. So teams that qualify through, they do their challengers leagues in the ESL. They qualify through world ranking, so just competing in events that give them points to move up the world rankings. And generally, the challengers leagues are a part of that as well. So teams will qualify, and then there'll be a 7-game group stage, and then there will be a top 4 in each group, and then they go to playoffs. And then the winners of this Pro League will qualify for Katowice and the Blast World Final. At least that's how it worked for the Season 18 ESL Pro League. So Counter-Strike is a very decentralized esport. There are a lot of different companies that run tournaments. There's PGL, there is ESL, there is Blast. There are, I don't know if Blast is a part of ESL or they're like joined, if they're conjoined like in terms of ownership. I have no idea. But basically, it's very decentralized, so this is the best example that Counter-Strike has of a centralized league. And while there are partnered teams that will always be a part of the Pro League, at least until they drop out themselves, you do still have a system where teams can come out of nowhere, get really good, go on a heater, and then qualify for this league, and then potentially qualify for the big world championships. So I think that this is a pretty decent format, and one that we may end up seeing more and more, where we have, one half is partner teams that are always there, then the other half is teams that can just come out of nowhere. Because the reason why I always mentioned in this video the tier 2 side of things and how they work for each of the leagues is that you need a tier 2 scene to be healthy to have an esport be successful. If you don't have a good flow of young, new talent coming in, then the competitions are going to get stale. You're going to have players far past their prime still competing. You're just not really going to have as big of a competitive scene as you really want. So you need a good tier 2 scene. I'm not saying that it always has to be relegation. I don't know if relegation is always the answer. I know a lot of people do want relegation in like the VCT and the League of Legends leagues. I don't know if relegation is what exactly we need, but we do need these companies, these developers, to support tier 2 in whatever way that they can. So having a good way of allowing teams to compete at the tier 1 level when they started at the tier 2 level, it's very important. And I do think ESL probably has the best example of that with the qualifier teams. So having 32 teams total, I think that's a really good format. And I give props to ESL and Valve for how they've handled Counter-Strike esports, and I think they've done a really good job, and that shows in the numbers, as we'll talk about. And now getting to those numbers, we're going to be looking at the peak viewership and the total amount of prize money that has been handed out through each esport over the entire time of each of these games being a game. Now, not every single cent of the prize money is going to be specifically from each of these leagues, but it is just showing how big each esport has grown, or how it's, given out money. So looking at it in order of how we looked at these leagues, Overwatch, so the peak viewership that we've ever had for Overwatch was January 2018, where whatever tournament it was had 437,000 views. That was the first year of the Overwatch League, was 2018. So they peaked really early, it seems, and they just were never able to even reach that amount again. So I think that's a pretty damning number, and it's kind of insane to me that is, the peak that they got to. And in terms of prize money, Overwatch has given out over $39 million of prize money. So as you can see, there's been not a lot of views, but a lot of money thrown out. So you know what? If you were an Overwatch pro that was mildly successful, you could have made money pretty well during, at least, if you won a couple terms or not, because that's a lot of money for something that really did not reach the viewership to justify that amount. And that can also be seen in Call of Duty, which I will give a bit more of a pass to, because it's been around for 20 years. So this money is just, throughout the entire time that Call of Duty has been a thing, and not just a Call of Duty league. But in terms of the peak viewership, we've had 439,000 views in September of 2020. So that was the second year of the Call of Duty League. That was the first year of the Call of Duty League, my apologies. But September 2020, that was the most that we've gotten so far, so we haven't been able to get to that number again. And then in prize money, it is $33 million. Over $33 million has been given out over the entire lifetime of Call of Duty as a franchise. So that is more reasonable because it's been out for so long. But we haven't seen the numbers really flourish in the league and just how it's worked so far. Moving on to Valorant, much better numbers. We have 1,505,000 views in September of 2022. I believe that was Champions 2022. That was a great tournament. And in terms of prize money, they have already almost caught up to both Overwatch and Call of Duty with $24 million. Over $24 million given out in the lifetime of Valorant, so since 2020. So Valorant, very young, but the numbers show that it is already a pretty successful esport, and if Riot is able to continue it and its popularity in the way that they have for League of Legends, we could see that number just keep going up and eventually reach league numbers. Will it? I don't know for sure, but I do think that Valorant has a lot of potential, and it's already showing it very early on. And moving on to League of Legends, which by far has the best view count of any of the leagues that I've talked about in this video. That's insane. That was last year's Worlds, which was a very good tournament from what I heard about it. So that's pretty insane that they are still reaching new peak viewerships over a decade after the game has already come out. So that's very impressive. And in terms of prize money, we have nearly 100 million being given out throughout League of Legends' lifetime. So the numbers are there. There's a lot of viewership. There's a lot of money, there's a lot of teams, there's a lot of regions. League's huge, and, if the teams aren't getting the money back, Riot certainly is, because League of Legends continues to be very, very popular, and the numbers do show this. Now moving on to Counter-Strike, the peak viewership for Counter-Strike, so that is not, I don't believe that's ESL is this number, but it's just the peak viewership just in general for all Counter-Strike esports, not just the Pro League. Over 2.7 million views in November of 2021. So again, a game that came out, this was in the CSGO era, that game came out in 2013, reached peak viewership in 2021. Very impressive, very good long run by CSGO there. And in terms of prize money, it is surprisingly above League of Legends with $130 million being given out over the lifetime of Counter-Strike. Valve is very good at making prize pools very huge. They've done it for Dota 2, which I believe has over $300 million of prize pool money, so it just blows everybody else out of the water. Valve does put their money where their mouth is when it comes to esports, and they make sure that these tournaments have huge amounts of prize money. So, long video. Was hoping this one wouldn't be another very long one, but this is probably going to be 30 minutes over after I edit it. But I had a lot to talk about. We had a lot of leagues to look at. And there are obviously other leagues that do exist. There's one for Mobile Legends, I believe. I don't know anything about that game. It's a mobile game. I'm not a mobile gamer. I felt like it wasn't really relevant for me to talk about in this video because I don't really care about esports for mobile games, but that's just me. Sorry if that offends anyone. I don't even know what Mobile Legends is. It's a mobile game. That's all I know about it. These are the leagues that I want to talk about, and let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Do you think franchising is something that is good for esports? Which example of this do you think is the best example, and which one do you pay attention to the most? Please like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.